Hey everyone, welcome back to another video from A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach. Today we are going through the round 17 trade targets and round preview. We are finally on the home stretch. This is the last bye round. It's going to be a tough week, let's put it that way, but we're going to get through it together. We'll also mention that I will put the audio of this up on Spotify and other podcasting platforms if you want to hear the audio of it instead. If you guys enjoy the video, as always, really appreciate a thumbs up, and do please consider subscribing to the channel as well if you haven't already, as I put more videos out throughout the rest of the 2021 SuperCoach season. But let's get into the video. So we'll do a really quick wrap up of Team List Tuesday. There's only 4 matches this week because of the bye, so there's not too much to get into. The main things that I wanted to call out here was for the Warriors. Tohu Harris is a big out. It looks, early reports were 2 to 4 weeks, but it's looking potentially even up to the 4-week mark. That's definitely something to consider whether you sell him or you hold him. Personally, I'm still leaning towards holding just because I think he is a season keeper. Trades are running out, and I think he'll be good for the back end of the season. So I'm really looking to hold him if possible, but I do understand, people wanting to sell if they're really lacking depth in the second row forward. Josh Curran is also out, but if you are still holding on to him, potentially with Tohu Harris coming out, you might want to hold Curran for a little bit longer because you would expect that he actually plays in the number 13 role while Tohu Harris is out. So Curran could actually be a pretty sneaky hold. He obviously won't cover round 17 because he is still in self-isolation, but from round 18 onwards for the next few weeks, he could actually be pretty decent. Big ins for the Warriors are Cody Nikorima, Reece Walsh and Matt Lodge, all making their start for the Warriors, and Matt Lodge obviously for his first game for the Warriors. For the Raiders, the big news out of them was that Ryan James, thank God, he is named off the bench and hopefully will provide 30 to 40 points in my round 17 bye coverage because he hasn't really done too much for me lately. And Xavier Savage is actually coming in to replace Bailey Simonson, who is out for 4 to 6 weeks and definitely looks like a big sell candidate. For the Rabbitohs, obviously they've lost a bunch of players to Origin, so there's going to be a bunch of changes coming in. We won't run through all of those. One thing I did want to call out though is that on the extended bench you've got Josh Mansour and also Jackson Paulo. That might potentially spell some bad news for Tane Mill, but we can get into that a little bit later in the video. And for the Roosters, big ins here is Victor Radley's coming back from his 5-game suspension. Billy Smith has been named to start in the centres, and Drew Hutchinson has been named to start at 5'8", so that pushed Lachlan Lamb to the bench. That potentially might spell bad news for Sam Verrills if that was something you're looking to purchase this week, given that I'd expect Lachlan Lamb coming off the bench would probably spend some time at number 9, so Verrills might not get as many minutes as you might have hoped for. And a big out for the Roosters is Joseph Swiley has been named on an extended bench. This has been a bit of a topic of discussion because he has been named at number 21 and he's had that number 21 jersey on since he's debuted, because he's too young to really have any of the gambling sponsors on his back, so they put 21 in as well as a charity. So that's not a surprise that he's named at the number 21 jersey. It would just be a case of waiting for final team lists to see if he actually does get named in the starting lineup. We saw that last week against the Storm, in that he came in for Matt Ikuvalu at the last minute. As a Matt Ikuvalu owner, I kind of want him to, I don't want Swiley to come into the team basically, but that's something to definitely keep an eye on. Those were the key kind of things I wanted to call out for Team List Tuesday. Again, not too much I think I wanted to get into. I think most people probably hopefully would have seen this by now, and there's only 4 matches happening. Can you get too many from Manly? They've been absolutely killing it recently. As you can see, the 2 guys that I've highlighted here, I think, who are very big purchases in. Jason Saab, who's actually the most traded in player for this round, and Ruben Garrick, who I think is hanging around number 3 or number 4. Big trade in targets. And I kind of want to touch on both of these guys, whether I think that's worthwhile or not. Jason Saab, it really is interesting. He's at 480k and he's obviously come off a massive score, 162 last week against the Bulldogs. What I will say is that what I put there in that table is I put the averages of both these guys with and without Turbo, because obviously the Manly side is night and day when he's in the team. Saab averaging without Turbo is 23 points and with Turbo is 70. So you can see there's a massive difference there. And with Ruben Garrick, it's 59 without Turbo and 102 with Turbo. That just shows you how good Garrick has been since Turbo's come back into the team. His goal kicking, his scoring tries for fun, and that's pushed him all the way up to 846k. So I'll touch about Jason Saab first. I don't think Saab is a great trade, and it has a feeling of chasing last week's points, and I think just think about it as well. In round 18, I wouldn't expect Tom Turbo to play because Manly played on the Friday, which is only 2 games after State of Origin Game 3. We saw in State of Origin Game 1 that after 2 days rest, Tom didn't play and he was rested. I would expect that to happen again. So you're looking at a fortnight without Turbo in the team. And as you can see from that average there, yes, the opposition is good in the Raiders, and who knows what team the Dragons are going to throw it in round 18. But Saab, he's more likely to give you a kind of a lower score without Turbo in the team. Even if you're looking at the past 5 weeks, obviously that massive 162, but games with Turbo, you've got 67, 26, 40, 42-30. They're not amazing. Obviously, the 30-point game was against Parramatta, so that's a pretty tough team. But like 26 against the Cowboys, 42 against the Knights, not amazing. So with Saab, I really feel like it is a bit of chasing last week's points. The Raiders obviously are not great. They've conceded a lot of points recently. But personally, I don't think I can go for Saab. And as we'll get onto a little bit later, at his price range at 480k, I do think there are a lot better options with lower ownership as well. That is something I think I wanted to point out, is that Saab's ownership is pretty high. It's around 20+% owned. And I think centre wing seems like a great opportunity to make a lot of ground with point of difference players. And so I think around his price range, there's a lot better options. Ruben Garrick though, 846k, I think is a different story, because playing at fullback, we saw the last time he did, as you can see there in round 14, he scored 106 points, which is really, really spectacular. Again, it was a weak opposition in the Cowboys, coming up against this week in the Raiders, who do concede quite a few points to fullbacks. I think Garrick is still probably worth it. There is a bit of a question mark though, if say in the next fortnight, if he regresses back to this average without turbo of 59, maybe his price will drop after the next 2 weeks, and in round 19, you can pick him up potentially a little bit cheaper. But I do think this is something you just need to kind of weigh up in your head, whether you're willing to fork out the money. I think if you can make the money work, by selling Cleary from last week, or selling, say, Nico Hines, if you've already done that, I think I'll still pay the money, because as I read a good quote actually on one of the SuperCoach forums on Facebook today. You don't win SuperCoach with cash in the bank. You win SuperCoach with points. And Garrick is providing mass points. So I think if you can fork out the money and it doesn't kind of interrupt a lot of your future trade plans, I think that is something worthwhile considering. If you're shelling out all this money for Garrick, but that stops you from bringing in like a Pappenhausen or for Feeder down the line, then I think you have to weigh it up, and maybe you could potentially argue a fortnight is a better time to pick him up when Turbo comes back into the team. Otherwise, I think just fork out the money, because as you can see, he's got a negative 14 break even. He's obviously going to go up more in value, probably pushing over to 900k, because he's had 2 massive scores in the past 2 weeks. So Garrick, for me, I think is more of a better trading target. I've highlighted that I think he is a run home centre wing gun, absolute season keeper. So for that reason, I think Garrick is still worth it, but I think you really need to decide if you're willing to fork out that money for him. So as I highlighted just then, I think there's a lot of good kind of mid-range centre wings who do cover round 17 and have quite good draws for the rest of the season, and they're a lot less owned than a Jason Saab, and I think they're potentially better prospects. And I think the reason I've kind of identified a lot of this kind of price range is that Bailey Simonson, who's very, very popular trade out target, is priced around 415k, so it's not a lot of cash to get up to these guys. So I think he's definitely a good sell candidate, given he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks, and I think there's a multitude of options here that we can consider. Sorted this by centre wings who, as the time that I pulled this together, had ownership of less than 10%, and what I thought were favourable draws and not too expensive. So we'll start with the Sharks. I think I've made it quite obvious in the past few weeks that the Sharks draw is very, very good for the rest of the season. They don't really verse a tough opposition apart from, say, Manly in round 20 and the Storm in the final round of the season. And even in that, the Storm might rest a few of their players. So the Sharks draw overall is really, really strong. And so I've highlighted 3 of the more popular pod centre wings, if that makes sense: Jesse Ramian, Ronaldo Mulitalo, and Sione Katoa. I think Ramian has probably been the one who's got the most exposure, given that he's had really, really high base. And the past couple of weeks, he scored around 55 to 60, not doing much. He's just goes through a lot of work. He has a lot of tackle breaking ability. He loves an offload, and that really just has a really high floor for him. And so that pushes way to a 63 average for the season. And I think he's probably the safest bet if you're looking to get into the Sharks backline, in addition to, say, like a Sean Johnson. For me, I think I more am appealed by the wingers, actually, because I think they're less owned, and I think we see wingers on the end of tries more often. Mulitalo was unlucky to score last week against the Broncos. Sione Katoa didn't score a try as well, but they both scored really, really well. Mulitalo had 52 last week against the Broncos, and Katoa had 70, both without scoring a try, so they're just as equal potentially at maybe not getting quite the same amount of base as Jesse Ramian, but I think they do have maybe higher upside in my opinion, and they're a little bit cheaper. Mulitalo's 495k, Sione Katoa's 447k. Now, what I do like, obviously that draw is really strong, as I mentioned. Warriors, Raiders, Bulldogs, Manly, Warriors again in the next 5 weeks. Katoa is actually probably the one who interests me the most. He's got basically nil ownership. He's on 0.5% because he's been injured for such a long time in so far during this season. He's a little bit cheaper than the rest of them, 447k compared to 495 for Mulitalo and 509 for Jesse Ramian. He has obviously done pretty well in his first week back last week, scoring 70. He actually had a really strong season last season. He's averaged 59 or thereabouts last season, and he was scoring lots of tries. And the benefit of him is that he plays on the right wing. That's the side that Sean Johnson plays. So I really like Katoa. I might potentially go for him, say, if I've got Matt Ikuvalu, who plays on Saturday, I believe. If he ultimately doesn't get named, I might just do a switch from Ikuvalu to Katoa, just because I can't really afford to go a straight swap to, say, a Daniel Tupou. So Katoa, I actually really like as a real strong point of difference. I think center wing is the spot that you want to be going for your point of difference plays. So if you think about your team structure for the rest of the season and say who you want to reserve, I think fullback is a given. You're definitely going to be wanting to run 2 fullbacks for the rest of the season. Personally, I would also run 2 halfbacks, so like a halfback and a 5'8", and probably also a center wing. So, just really go hard for it in the backs, because I think we're not seeing the upside in the second row forward and the front row forward. And so I think going for center wing, even on matchups, potentially you could go for 2 center wing reserves. And so I think because you've got more space to play with 7 slots in the center wing, I think you can really go for some point of difference wingers and centers who've got really high upside, which is why I've put such a long list together here. So out of those Sharks boys, I think Katoa, in my opinion, probably is the biggest risk, because he is, just coming back off an injury. But I think potentially as a point of difference play could be fantastic. We'll go on to the Roosters players. Obviously, fantastic matchup this week against the Bulldogs, and the next few weeks after that are not too bad with the Cowboys and the Knights. They do have 2 tough games after that, though, with the Eels and the Panthers, but I do believe their draw does improve again after that. It's kind of the way with the Roosters towards the end of the season. Their draw kind of has these swings where they've got a period of good 3 weeks and then kind of a tougher 2 weeks. I think Daniel Tupou is like an obvious trade-in target from the Roosters backline for round 17 and for the rest of the season as well. He's got fantastic base. He even scored last week in a tough game against the Storm, where they scored 0 points, 49 points. That did include a line break, but basically 35 to 40 in base. That's kind of what you're getting from him. You're not going to really get bad scores, and obviously prime matchup against the Bulldogs, and he's super cheap. 481k. He actually could be even cheaper. He's got a break even of 105, but odds are that I think he could even beat that this week. So I think Tupou, for obvious reasons, is a fantastic trade-in out of the Roosters. If you're looking for a bit of a different option to, say, a Tupou, Ikuvalu, as I mentioned, he's 454k, a little bit cheaper. 1.3% owned, so definitely a lot less than Tupou, and he's not getting traded in to the volume that Tupou is. I'd expect Tupou's ownership to creep up closer towards 10% at the end of this round. The problem with Ikuvalu is that there's this concerns about his job security. Obviously, last week, he was dropped at the last minute for Joseph Suaalii, and Ikuvalu's had a tough couple of games where he was just making some errors, and obviously he puts in a lot of effort, but I'm a bit concerned myself as an owner, so I don't know if I could recommend Ikuvalu. I think if you have the cash, I would just go for a Tupou, in my opinion. Joseph Manu is the last guy I wanted to touch on. 469k, again, he's kind of in the middle between those two. The benefit of Manu is that he's playing at fullback this week and probably next week as well, given that I think the Roosters play on Saturday, so that's 3 days after the State of Origin Game 3. Potentially Tedesco might rest, and then that means Manu's playing fullback again. And when Manu plays at fullback, he's an amazing SuperCoach player. He bangs out like 90s and 100s. He scored I think 97 the last time he played at fullback. And playing at fullback against the Bulldogs, well, we saw last week's fullback score 144. Obviously, I don't think Manu's the same caliber as a Tom Trbojevic, but I think Manu could definitely be odds on to get a ton here. The problem with Manu is that just when he plays at centre, he's just not a good SuperCoach option. He gives you like 35 to 40 at best, and you really would be trading him in for really short-term kind of benefit, which is the next fortnight, I believe. It's a tough one, I think, for myself to get around, I think, as a trade-in target. But obviously, if you own him, I think, that's great. But I don't know if I'd go for Manu just because it's more of a shorter-term kind of upside, I think, with him. Whereas I think with Tupou, you've got a lot safer of an option there who can carry you through for the rest of the season. One person I did want to touch on from the Warriors is Dallin Watene-Zelezniak, who's just made his move there from the Bulldogs. At 441k, he's actually been averaging quite well. Think about that. He was averaging 56 playing in that Bulldogs outfit. A funny stat, well, funny for non-Bulldogs fans, pretty sad for Bulldogs fans, is that the Bulldogs so far this season have scored 172 points. Ruben Garrick has scored 182 himself. So you can just see that the Bulldogs, not scoring many points, but Watene-Zelezniak still averaging 56. Obviously, he's playing at fullback, so it's a little bit different. You have a bit higher of a base and work rate compared to playing on the wing, but obviously he's playing in a much better team and with a pretty decent draw. The Sharks this week is pretty good. It's a hard game to actually call in terms of who's going to win that, but still I'd say it's a good opposition. The next fortnight is a bit tough though. Panthers and the Rabbitohs. Panthers hopefully will rest a lot of their Origin players. Well, when I say hopefully for the Warriors' sake, for our SuperCoach teams, I hope they don't. But your Brian To'os, etc., they all might get a rest in round 18, so that Panthers team might not be as strong. Obviously, they're not going to be with Jerome Luai and Nathan Cleary, so that definitely does weaken them. And then you got the Rabbitohs in round 19 is definitely tough. After that, though, the Warriors draw is fantastic. Tigers, Sharks again. So I think Dallin Tennis-Lesniak is a real point of difference, and I think maybe not someone I'd go for this week, because I think there are different teams with better short-term fixtures such as the Sharks and the Roosters, but definitely someone I think to monitor, see how he performs on the wing for the Warriors, and if he looks like he's been putting up some decent numbers, he could be a real flyer for the back end of the season. And finally, we've got Campbell Graham out of the Rabbitohs. I mean, he's the most expensive one here at 532k, averaging 59, but he's had back-to-back tons now, had a very quiet beginning of the season. But we're seeing that the Rabbitohs are moving more and more, or putting more attack to the right-hand side, not just so centered on the left-hand side. So that's definitely benefiting like Campbell Graham. He's got very good base statistics. I think he averages around 35 or 36 points a game in base, so he's very safe for a good score. Now, if you just throw in a couple of tries, then he has those really big scores over 100, and it's been spoken about plenty of times. The Rabbitohs draw is really solid. Cowboys, Bulldogs, Warriors, and Dragons in the next month, and then the Eels in round 21. But then again, they've got some slightly tougher matches towards the back end of the season against the Panthers and the Roosters. But again, as we've seen, the Roosters have been conceding quite a few points recently as well. Campbell Graham has also got great point of difference factor. I mean, 2.7%. He is more expensive, and I think there is an argument that you could potentially go for the higher owned Alex Johnston, but he's also about 711k, so you'd be saving so much money going for Campbell Graham. And for that reason, I actually think I'd be leaning towards Campbell Graham, because I think Johnston, well, yes, those matchups, he could definitely be scoring the doubles and hat-tricks as well. But Campbell Graham, I think, could be a nice POD. But if I had to rank, maybe the top three out of these, out of the list that I've got here, I would say Daniel Tupou is number one. Just purely, the Bulldogs matchup this week, very safe, and he's very affordable from what we know that he can produce. So I think Tupou, in my opinion, is probably number one. For number two, I would actually put it at a bit of a tie between Mulatalo and Katoa, basically the wingers for the Sharks. I think playing on the wing definitely gives them higher upside of scoring tries. I like Katoa playing on the right-hand side, on Sean Johnson's side, and I really like Mulatalo. He's got a point to prove after that kind of whole Origin fiasco, and so I really like both of them as real high upside point of difference plays. Number three, I'd probably go for a Campbell Graham. Obviously, Campbell Graham is fantastic, but I think he's a little bit more expensive, which does kind of dock the ranking in my opinion. And also, he does have a tendency, if he doesn't score those tries or the attack doesn't go to towards the right-hand side, he doesn't really get as high of the scores that we see like an Alex Johnson on the left. So the next kind of topic I wanted to discuss was the halves. I've spoken a lot about the halves, and especially ones that cover round 17. Sean Johnson, I think, is the most obvious one. I brought in Sean Johnson, and last week against the Broncos, he looked quite threatening at times, and he scored 75, which is actually a really solid floor. And he didn't even get that many major attacking stats. He got his points in a variety of ways, such as forced dropouts. I think he had like one line break, a few offloads and tackle breaks. So really good game for him, Supercoach wise. And I think, as I've just mentioned, Sharks draw is fantastic. So I think SJ is a perfect round 17 halfback if you haven't got him already. The other debate is probably your Cody Nikorima. Obviously, he was a late out last week, so not many people went for him, after hearing that news. I think, as I've kind of mentioned in previous videos, Nikorima has shown really high upside. There's no Chad Townsend, so we probably know that Nikorima is goal kicking, unless that ankle issue of his is stopping him from goal kicking. But based on the reports, him and Reece Walsh have both come out of their first one of their training sessions this week in good health. So I think Nikorima probably looks okay to be goal kicking as well. And I think he could be, a higher upside play, definitely more of a point of difference as well from Sean Johnson. Nikorima is definitely someone I'm looking at potentially bringing in. Matt Burton is actually a big sell candidate for either of these two. I just will mention that with Matt Burton, he has been kind of saved a little bit by tries in the past few weeks, and obviously last week had a really low game of 18, but it was against a tough opposition in the Eels. For the Panthers, the next two games after this are not too bad. They've got the Warriors in round 18, then they've got the Broncos in round 19. Given that I've already got Sean Johnson and Nikorima, kind of high-ish break even of 82, and the next three games for Nikorima is not amazing. Sharks is good, Panthers and Rabbitohs could be tough. So I think Nikorima, I'm happy to wait a little bit on him potentially, and maybe in round, say, 20, after Burton's finished that game against the Broncos, hopefully he does really well, and that's when the Warriors draw does really open up. I think that potentially might be a good time to go to like a Nikorima. I do also have a Josh Schuster who probably makes more sense to trade to a Nikorima, but Josh Schuster I think could also be potentially even a decent hold given Manly's draw. Hopefully he comes back into the starting lineup. I think so. If you're a Matt Burton to Nikorima trade, I don't mind it, but I will just mention that I think if you're looking at just say the draw, I think Burton can potentially have really, really high upside in round 18 and 19, which can counteract Nikorima's tougher games in round 18 and 19. Sam Walker's the final halfback I wanted to talk about who plays in round 17. Obviously had a really tough game last week against the Storm, well the whole Roosters team did basically, and he's really, really cheap compared to these two at 443k. He's definitely someone I've considered as well. I just am concerned about his his health, and I feel like the Roosters are potentially going to rest him throughout the rest of the season. We've seen that Drew Hutchinson is back, so they've definitely got more coverage in that area. I mean, they've got Lachlan Lamb and Drew Hutchinson who can definitely play as the 5'8" and the halfback. And Sam Walker could definitely be getting more restings for the rest of the season. But it's an amazing matchup against the Bulldogs, and I think we will see some high upside from him. I think we will see at least one more ton from him for the rest of the season. I think the question is, when is it going to happen, and can you be able to get on him at that point in time? So Sam Walker does look appealing at 443k. I personally would spend a little bit extra for Nikorima or Sean Johnson. There's obviously a few other halfbacks who I haven't mentioned. I did speak about quite a few more last week who don't play in round 17 but could be great point of differences for the rest of the season. Daly Cherry Evans comes to mind. I think he obviously had a massive score last week of 119. Manly's draw is probably the best, and then the Sharks after that for the rest of the season, and Cherry Evans definitely can have high upside as we saw last week. So Cherry Evans is definitely one to consider, which is kind of the reason why I'm also not looking to maybe pull the pin on a Matt Burton straight away this week, just in case I might be tempted by Cherry Evans to trade in instead next week, given that I think this week is pretty hard to get good amount of points, and so I might just take the hit for this round. But those are the three guys I think who play in round 17 who got the most consideration. Sean Johnson for me is the most obvious one if you haven't got him already, and I think Nikorima definitely is a good point of difference with a higher upside, so I definitely think he's a good trading target as well. Sam Walker I think is a more of a bit of a risk play, given that I think he's got that injury history, and he's pretty banged up after copping some big hits from Justin Olam last week, but he has the best game this week, so it's definitely something to consider. So I'll also touch on round 17 playing front row forwards, something I've also mentioned in previous videos. Adam Fanua-Blake had a great game last week, scoring 76. I will note that did come with extra minutes, given that the game went into Golden Point. Tohu Harris also got injured quite early in that game, so that probably also meant bigger minutes for Fanua-Blake. So that helped him get a 76-point game, playing 76 minutes essentially. I still think Fanua-Blake is a great value. He's around 420k, which is really, really underpriced. I think if he plays around 60 to, maybe 55 to 60 minutes for the rest of the season, he'll probably have a PPM, I reckon, of about 1 to just a bit over 1 PPM. And so he's probably going to average around 60 to 65, in my opinion, if he's in full health. And so I think, priced at 420k, that presents great value. And I got him last week, and I'm really happy, obviously, with the 76 from him. Matt Lodge coming into the Warriors lineup does shake things up a little bit. But as I told some people, I don't think that's going to really affect Fanua-Blake's minutes that much. I think Fanua-Blake is their number one prop, in my opinion. They spent a lot of money off-season to get him over there. And so I think, with Matt Lodge coming in, I think both of them are still going to be fine. I think the impact is going to be on a lot of their other middles, like your Kane Evans, your Bunty, your Foles, etc. So I'm not as concerned about Matt Lodge coming in. I mean, if you don't have Fanua-Blake, obviously you want him for probably round 17 coverage, but if you can afford to wait, you can wait and see how he goes with Matt Lodge in the team. But overall, I think he's an okay trade and target. Less so, I think, is Luke Thompson, who has really started to decrease in the past few weeks. As you can see there, his last three games, 52, 42, and 59, a lot less than the kind of mid-60s and even some of the 70 point games that we were seeing earlier in the season. The return of Josh Jackson is definitely impacting that. I think he doesn't have to do as much work through the middle, and so I think that's definitely impacting him, and also conceding a bunch of points. So there's just less time for the game to actually be played, and you've just got more time spent under the goalpost, as Ruben Garrick is goal kicking. So I don't know if that's a big factor, but I think it is putting the edge off Luke Thompson a little bit. I'd probably prefer Fanua-Blake over Luke Thompson at this point in time. And Fanua-Blake, in my opinion, also just has higher upside than Luke Thompson, who's very much safe in that 55 to 60 range. Mighty Tapau has had a couple of lower scores in the past fortnight, 46 and 53. Look at that. Before that, we were seeing 69, 67, 94, 69 again. He was putting some really, really big scores together. I think part of that is kind of what I just mentioned with Luke Thompson. With Manly scoring so many points, there's just less time for the forwards to be getting into it when it's all the backs who are scoring all the points. And there's just less time for the forwards to make an impact and actually do some defensive work. So that might potentially be impacting him. I still think he's decent because he does have high upside, as you can see in those past few games in, say, round 7 and round 10. But I do think there is potentially some maybe some risk that he might regress to maybe a mid-50s kind of scorer again. And so for that reason, I still probably am leaning towards Fanua Blake, because I think Fanua Blake just is a lot cheaper, and so I think presents better value. Siusiu Takiaho is also someone I mentioned potentially as consideration. He just hasn't, to be honest, shown enough, I think, now in the past few weeks. I mean, we got 45 last week, 46 the week before. His minutes are fluctuating. I mean, he played 56 minutes last week. He doesn't quite have the work rate, I think, of some of these other guys. I mean, the reason that most people jumped on him was because he was goal kicking. I don't think he'll be goal kicking this week with, he's basically, in my opinion, lost goal kicking duties to Adam Kieran if he plays, or Sam Walker if he plays. So I really think that really high upside that we're going to see from Takiaho, we're not going to see it anymore, essentially. So Takiaho, I don't think is a great trade-in for mine. I'd definitely be preferring a Fanua Blake, in my opinion. So we'll just touch on a few cheapies who you might consider if for round 17. I'll first give my general thoughts on whether cheapies are a good option to go for in the first place. For me, I think as I kind of mentioned, with injuries and suspensions, I think having good squad depth is really, really important. And I think if you're looking to get a cheapie, if you haven't got any so far, I think going with one is okay if you're looking to generate some money. Maybe get someone who'll cover round 17 and, you can just not play for the rest of the season. But someone like myself who's got like a bench of Vojevic, who's already given me like 1 point games coming off the bench, I don't know if I want to go for a cheapie unless I'm really desperate to create money. But at the moment, I'm okay in terms of cash. But if you're in the position where you're okay to bring in a cheapie in terms of the rest of your team setup, and you're looking to generate a lot of money, I think there's a few guys that you can consider. Tainui Milne, I mentioned last week, is probably the best round 17 cheapie. He scored pretty well last week with a 60 plus game. I still think he's probably the best cheapie to go for. He's not quite a cheapie in that he's 268k, he's not like 173k, but he's still got a negative break even of -24. And as I mentioned with Campbell Graham, it does look like the Rabbitohs are looking a bit more to their right hand side in terms of their attack, and playing on the wing, he definitely has that scope to get some tries and obviously generate some decent points, but also some decent cash as well. It also depends on your trade situation. I think if you're willing to burn 2 trades to get in Milne, and maybe also trade him out if you're looking to actually capitalize on the cash gain. Otherwise, you can just trade him in, cover round 17, maybe play in matchups or as some depth in your center wing or second row forward if you get an injury elsewhere in the team. But realistically, though, there is some question mark in that. I think Josh Mensah and Jackson Paulo have both been named on the extended bench. Jackson Paulo, in my opinion, is probably preferred over Josh Mensah, who seems like he's actually just lost his place because he's been healthy, but Milne has still been in the team. But Jackson Paulo potentially might come in and take his place, so that might end his prospect as someone you can use as depth the rest of the season. So I would just weigh that into your consideration if you're looking to bring in a Tainui Milne. Xavier Savage is the fullback at the Raiders, who will be replacing Bailey Simonson. At 173k, he's a genuine cheapie. He will provide some points, obviously, in round 17 and probably for the next month. He is listed at centre wing, so it is a position that you can definitely, get a cheapie in because you've got 7 slots available. So I think if you haven't got a cheapie yet, I think Savage is probably a good guy to go for. But my kind of general also thinking on cheapies is that if you're looking to bring in some of these 173k guys, it's good if they've got that dual flexibility. So Savage is, I think, only listed at centre wing, but if you can go instead for like a genuine nuff, as we call it, like a Jared Anderson, who's like a second row forward centre wing dual, or I've got a Ben Trbojevic, who's not quite enough, but hopefully when Manly gets some of their forwards back, he drops out of the 17. Just having that dual flexibility really does help your team towards the back end of the season, switching around positions, if there's injuries or if you're looking to do big trades. For example, in my team, I've got Nico Hines at centre wing. Through Ben Trbojevic, I can actually trade Nico Hines to like a day for feeder. And so, that's just one of the options of flexibility that these guys give you that some cheapies like Xavier Savage won't provide. But I think he potentially, for the next month, he might be okay, but I wouldn't be looking at him as a cash cow. He'd be someone you just plug in for this week, and then that's it. You wouldn't be really playing for the rest of the season. Justice Wali, I've still got, as I mentioned, I don't think he's probably a fantastic trade-in target now, given that we don't actually know if he's playing. I don't think I'd be actively looking to trade him in. It's more of a case of if you've got him in the team, you can potentially upgrade him to someone else. Personally, I might just leave him as my kind of 7th centre wing, and hopefully play in matchups if he does get named. Cade Cuss is someone who I just wanted to touch on as well. 176k. He has been named on the bench for Manly. So I just checked, and Cade Cuss is listed as a 5'8 hooker. So potentially Cuss could be someone that you could plug in as a really, really cheap hooker. And with that dual flexibility, if you've got like a Connor Watson, you could use that to switch around your team. Or, if you've got like a Brandon Smith, you could do some kind of switching around like that as well. And 176k, he's basically a cheapie, and he hasn't been playing in the 17 recently, but obviously this week with Manly losing some players, he's coming in for this round. could be a consideration in your hooker position. But as I mentioned, my general thought on the cheapies, I'm not too thrilled by most of them. I think Milne's probably the best one, but he also does have job security issues of his own. So we'll get onto the vice captaincy and captain candidates for this round. I think this is actually going to be really, really important as a key differentiator, because I think the majority of teams that are planned for round 17 are going to have the key guys like your Cody Walker, your Ruben Garrick, Alex Johnson, your Sean Johnson, etc. I think most teams will have that. But I think if you can nail the right captaincy pick, that's really going to swing you, I think, in the right way. So it's really important that we consider that this week. Ruben Garrick, I think, is probably the obvious vice-captain option if you have him playing on the first game of the round against the Raiders, who have been the 5th worst at defending fullbacks. Last time he played at fullback, he scored over 100 and obviously 169 last week, which is massive. So he looks like a safe VC option, definitely probably the one I'm going to be going for, given that goal kicking really just does add some good benefit, good base, I think, to his overall score. Cody Walker and Alex Johnson, I think, are the next best vice captaincy and captain options. I think potentially, vice captain Garrick, captain Cody Walker is probably going to be the most popular kind of combo. So I think if you're ranked pretty high up, I think if you want to play a bit more safe, you could go for a Cody Walker. If you're kind of chasing, I think maybe putting a vice captaincy on Cody Walker and instead taking a punt on some of the other guys that I'll just mention might be the way to go. And given that I expect most teams won't have the full 17, you probably will get a free crack at doing the vice captain loophole this week. And so I think, if you're able to get a good vice captaincy score from, say, like a Cody Walker and say he gets like 90 or 100, I would definitely be taking the vice captain loop of 100, given that you've just got a free chance to do it because you're going to have players out that you can use to do the loophole on. The Cowboys that they're versing, 2nd worst at defending 5'8", and for center wing, so like Alex Johnson, 4th worst. And we know that these guys can pile on the points we saw last week, basically in the first half, 99 and 107 for Cody Walker and Alex Johnson. So I think they're very, very good vice captain captaincy options. And as I mentioned, Cody Walker is probably going to be my captain for this week. If you're looking to go a bit more of a differential kind of way, I think the Roosters game and also the Sharks Warriors game will provide some better point of difference options. Sam Walker, as I mentioned, has got really high upside, and the Bulldogs are the 4th worst at defending halfbacks. Obviously, Sam Walker's coming off of a really low score last week against the Storm, but against the Bulldogs, if he is goal kicking, if we do potentially get some information on that, I think he could be a fantastic captain option. I think he could definitely be pushing over 90 points, even 100 plus. And so I think he could be a real point of difference. If you have him in your team, I would be seriously considering maybe like a vice captain Cody Walker and a captain Sam Walker. Just do the Walker boys basically. Joey Manu, as I mentioned, when he plays at fullback, he has massive potential for big scores. And the Bulldogs are the 4th worst at defending fullbacks. I think Manu, he's a real point of difference captain. As I mentioned, I don't know if I'd be actively looking to bring him in because the next 2 weeks he might play at fullback, but for the rest of the season he might just be in the centres. But it's odd to say that when you know that this week he has the potential to do really, really well. So I think if you've got a few more trades, maybe to get him in for a fortnight and maybe punt him again a bit later, I think Manu could be a great option because I think this week he could go massive and is a great captaincy option as well. And Daniel Tupou, again, is a bit of a flyer. The Bulldogs are the worst at actually defending centre wings. So Daniel Tupou, if you've got that Sam Walker cutout ball, that might see Tupou doing really well. I will note that Drew Hutchinson does play on the left, probably at 5'8", and Sam Walker plays on the right. I think the ball would probably be going a bit more towards Sam Walker's side, so that might actually go away from Tupou and go more towards like your Ikuvalu side if Ikuvalu plays. But Tupou, I think, still has good potential for a really big score. So I think definitely looks like a real punty captaincy option. The Warriors-Sharks game is really tough to call, and so I'm not as keen on putting a captaincy on one of these two guys. I've got Sean Johnson and Cody Nikorima. You could also just throw in like a Reece Walsh, who definitely has shown high upside so far this season. The Warriors have been the 4th worst at defending halfbacks, and the Sharks have been the 9th worst. So the Sharks definitely seem to be better at defending, halfbacks than, say, the Warriors. So I think Sean Johnson probably's got better potential for a bigger score than, say, Nikorima. But as I mentioned, it's really hard to kind of pick these two. Sean Johnson, as I've mentioned previously, I don't think he's got the same kind of upside that we've seen in previous years. He's more kind of hanging around this kind of 60 to 70, which is not bad. But for a captaincy, and I think if you're really chasing this week, I don't think, to be honest, I'd go for either of these guys. I think if you're chasing, I think you should probably go for one of the Roosters players. So we'll get onto the break-even section of the video now. To be honest, from the Bulldogs, there's no one I'm really considering. Luke Thompson is probably the one who's got the most relevance, and even then, as I mentioned, I don't think I'm too keen on him now moving forward. Raiders, as again, there's not too many options out of the Raiders. I mean, you've got Ryan James there. God, thank God he's playing for this week, because so far he's been useless for the past few rounds, not being named. And as I mentioned, you've got Bailey Simonson at 415k. definitely looks a great sell candidate. And if you just have to pay a little bit extra, you can go to one of those point of difference center wings that we've highlighted previously. Manly, I think, the obvious one is Jason Saab with a -53 break even, but as I mentioned, I do feel like it is a bit of chasing last week's points, and without Turbo in the side, who knows how well he's going to do. And Ruben Garrick with a -14 break even, opposite, I think he'll still be a really good trading target for this round. There's a few guys who have also caught my attention, maybe as a second row forward point of difference. You've got Ola Kawatu with a break even of 32 at 443k. If you're looking for a bit of a cheaper point of difference, maybe if you do decide to trade Tohu Harris, you can go to Ola Kawatu. He's done really well the past couple of weeks, cover round 17. But this is the thing as well, like with low trades now, I think with the majority of teams, I feel like you only want to be bringing in guys that you can keep like reliably for the rest of the season, unless you've got a lot of trades available to you, which is the reason why I'm not so keen on like your Ola Kawatus or your Sipleys or your Pasekas, for example. From the Cowboys, again, not too much interest here. I think the main person of consideration is Jason Taumalolo. He's so cheap at 461k. Break-even's okay at 55, which is kind of what he's been averaging for the rest of for the duration of this season so far. Tohu Harris to Taumalolo, look, it's interesting because it's a round 17 player in Taumalolo who's a SuperCoach gun of the past. I personally still have not seen enough out of Taumalolo to be bringing him in myself. I mean, I could be eating my words and he could start going on a run. But the next fortnight of games after this game for the Cowboys is pretty tough. I mean, obviously, Rabbitohs this week is tough. I'm pretty sure they verse the Roosters and the Storm in the next 2 games as well. How effective will Taumalolo be when, potentially the Cowboys are conceding a lot of points? How much defensive work is he going to do? Again, this is the reason why I'm not so keen on Taumalolo. I just haven't seen enough from him. And honestly, by round 21, when the draw opens up for the Cowboys, Tohu Harris is probably going to be back by then, so I might just be keeping Tohu Harris, and so I personally don't think I'd be bringing in Taumalolo myself, but definitely is someone to consider if you think that he's going to do really, really well now. From the Sharks, I think we've spoken quite a bit about some of their options. You've got like your Jesse Ramey, who's got a pretty high break even of 74, but he definitely could match that this week. You've got Ronaldo Mulatalo with a much more manageable break even of 59. And Sione Katoa, as I mentioned, he's just coming back, but he's got a break even of 52. So I think he actually could be maybe potentially at the lowest price range that he currently is, because he started the season at around 520, so he was priced at a pretty high price. So you could be getting him a little bit cheaper, and I think he's a decent option to consider as well for a centre wing. Will Kennedy is probably the only other person I'd mention out of the Sharks. He's got a break even of 25, 475k. I feel like with Kennedy, the time to get him was probably last week or the week before, when you knew that he was coming up against the Broncos, because Kennedy, I just don't see him as a top 2 fullback for the rest of the season. If you're bringing him in now, I think in a couple of rounds, you're probably going to want to be trading him out again to like a Pappenhausen or a Ponga. And the thing is, his break even isn't like super low in that he's going to make a lot of cash to get up to one of those guys. Like 25, yes, he might get to around 520k, but it's different if you say had like a -50 break even like a Saab. So if you brought him in for like 1-2 weeks, he could at least make you 150k. He's not going to do that for you. So I really don't think Kennedy, I personally wouldn't be bringing him in myself now. Out of the Rabbitohs, I mean, the guys who got the best break even is Tane Milne with -24 and Campbell Graham with -14. Spoken quite a bit about both of those players. Cody Walker, to be honest, I just think he's a must, to be honest, for this round. If you don't have him already, I would be prioritizing him, given how high his captaincy rate is going to be. If he goes well, he could really, really hurt you. So I think Cody Walker is just a gun you can keep for the rest of the season. So I'd be locking him in for sure. Maybe an option for next week to consider is Cam Murray with a really low break even of 13. Definitely with that good draw, definitely has the opportunity to get attacking stats. So I think Cameron Murray could be a great second row forward point of difference for the rest of the season. And I'd prefer him to say like a Jason Taumalolo in my opinion. I think yes, he will miss round 17, but the extra points that you might gain for the rest of the season might outweigh what Taumalolo might just provide you for this week alone. For the Roosters, I think a few people that might be interested, obviously because they've got a fantastic matchup against the Bulldogs. You've got Sam Verrills with a break-even of 24 at a very, very cheap price of 249k. But as I mentioned, Lachlan Lamb being named on the bench with Hutchinson in at 5'8". Lachlan Lamb can play hooker. I do expect that he will take some minutes off Sam Verrills. And last week he scored around 42 points in 60 minutes, which isn't a fantastic PPM. Obviously no attacking stats in a very, very tough game. So that explains, a bit of a lower score. But for me, I don't know. I'm probably not super keen now, given that Lachlan Lamb has been named on the bench there. Another guy to touch on is probably also Satili Tupanua. Obviously, he's now locked in for that starting edge back row role. And Satili Tupanua, he's got a really high break even of 114. But obviously, you would be looking to bring him in this week because he will cover round 17 against a fantastic opponent in the Bulldogs. At 498k, I think he's a lot better option in my opinion than say like a Jason Taumalolo. Well, actually, I don't know if I want to say that because Taumalolo is a proven gun, but Tupouniua, he's got that really high attacking upside. He doesn't have the base stats, which does concern me, but when you've got easy games in the next 3, Bulldogs, Cowboys, etc., I think Tupouniua could be a fantastic point of difference play, and definitely someone I think you can take a punt on as maybe a 4th second row forward to have some depth that you play in matchups for the rest of the season. Victor Radley's probably also someone I should mention. He's just coming back from his 5-game suspension. He's very, very cheap at 335k. He does have that benefit of like a second row forward hooker, dual flexibility. He's basically like a Brandon Smith light, if you think about that in terms of his price being a lot cheaper than a Brandon Smith. With Radley, I'm not sure how much I'm keen on him. I mean, he is playing extra minutes compared to last season. He's been playing around 60 plus in the games that he's played. It does seem like the head-high crackdown has cooled off a little bit, so Radley might have a bit better of a chance to actually stay in the team for a little bit longer. And so Radley, I don't actually mind, to be honest, as a bit of a punt in the hooker or second row forward position. And I think he also might potentially spend some time at number 9 as well, if Verrills gets a rest. But either way, playing at number 13 or number 9, he's pretty effective. I don't mind it actually as a trade-in target. I probably just haven't done enough research on him myself. But I think, again, if this is something you're willing to take a punt on to really, kind of take advantage in round 17, I think you probably couldn't do worse than a Victor Radley. For the Warriors, I think I've spoken about the majority of guys that I wanted to. I've added in Matt Lodge, who could be a good option as well in the front row forward compared to a Fanua Blake. He's a little bit more expensive, I think about 60k more at 484k. Just for that reason alone, I would probably just go for a Fanua Blake, who I know is probably going to be the number 1 prop there. And we just don't know what the minutes rotation is going to be for Lodge, well, also for AFB, but just given the price difference, I'd probably opt still for an Fanua Blake. So we'll just give a quick update on our group comp. Zach from Your Nan's a Pigeon, he had a massive score in round 17 of 1,689. So he topped the group for that round. So congratulations, Zach. He actually commented on the last video I put out. So congrats to you. In our overall top 5, we actually had a couple of new entrants one of them, Andrew, I've been messaging actually on Twitter. He's ranked 5th overall. He's been amazing, and he scored 1,523 last round, and he didn't even play Jason Saab, which is crazy. I don't know where his ranking would be if he played him, but Jesus, Andrew, condolences for not playing Saab, but obviously you're doing super well, so I don't know how much condolences you need because you're coming 5th. Hopefully you can make a run for the number 1 position come end of the season. And Marcelo as well, who I think is a new entrant, overall rank at 39. Both of you guys are smashing it, so congrats to you, and hopefully you can kick on for the rest of the season. Rounding out the top 5, we've got James, Andy, and James again, who are all ranked in the top 200 basically. We've got 169th, 187th, and 202nd. So maybe my advice is actually working. I don't know. No, I'm joking. These guys are probably doing super well by not listening to me. But yeah, congrats to you guys. If anyone wants to join the group, the code is 286239. Well, that's it, guys. That is the round 17 trade targets and preview. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, would really appreciate a thumbs up, and do please consider subscribing to the channel as well, and I'll see you guys in the next video.